Organization Research Group meeting in the spring. And this is I don't know whether I should say it's official, one of the official groups in the school. And our focus is on information organization. And there are 5 regular members, Richard, Steve, me, and Hope, and Margaret, sorry, right here. And this year we also have a postdoc fellow. You have to pronounce your name on your own.
Charles.
Charles, okay. And he just came here in January. He will be with us through the end of this calendar year. And he just got his PhD, so we can call you Dr. Julian. And today he's going to give us this talk. I think this is based on your dissertation.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's, the title is right on the screen here. And let's welcome Charles.
I'm going to need this to be a bit darker at the end. Is that going to be an issue?
What was that?
I'm going to need this area to be a bit darker at the
We
end.
can dim the lights up front right
Wow, perfect. Okay, well thank you for being here. I'm going to assume it's for me rather than the pizza. Thank you. So you can call me Charles. My full name will be said Charles-Antoine Julien, but Charles will be fine. And so today, main themes, information and visualization, 3D, and then semantically organized collections. So I'm going to concentrate a lot on this, and at the end I'll give you a demo of the actual application I built. So we're going to talk about the fact that search engines are not perfect. I think this is something we have to do in this field. I was struck in my PhD defense. The first question from one of the committee members that was not from this field, an external committee member, was, why didn't we just use Google? That was the first question I got. Why do we even need to organize information? Why is this useful? And so even though my supervisor told me this is not your research, you don't need to think about this, we have to remind ourselves that a lot of people out there are not aware of what we do, what we might do in information retrieval research, and think that Google can do everything. So I think we have to go through this exercise of reminding ourselves what it is we're doing. Then we're going to talk about information exploration, organized information, then vocabulary, LCSH, issues with LCSH, Library of Congress subheadings, so we'll do more details, and the patterns that we find in that. There are patterns in there, we can exploit them. And then the semantic structure reconstruction. This is something that's very rare to talk about, to reconstruct the structure of LCSH in this case, and finally the demo. And we'll take some questions. So what's the problems? This idea that search engines know everything. They can answer everything. So the primary problem, then this idea that they need adequate search terms. You have to know a bit about what you're talking about before you can actually start to search. So that it assumes what? That you already know enough about the subject to start searching for it. Now, what if some searchers are naive, Like, what if they think that they know more than they actually do? Does that ever happen? What if you really don't know enough about the subject? Now, of course, that never happens. But this is the assumption that Google makes, that you know something to start on. Now, I cannot give you an example, because if I give you an example, then you know something to start on. But then we have to assume there are some things we don't know enough about, unless we think we know everything. Okay? Then there's the issue of context. Say depression. What's the first thing that popped in your mind? Which one was it for you? Which one do you think Google will think what you meant? Anyone?
Psychology.
Why? Because Google is a mind reader. Google knows because it assumes what you meant is what everybody else means by it, what most people mean by it. Now, mind readers, they're impressive because they can guess a good portion of the time, but it doesn't change the fact that they don't actually know. They're just guessing. If I guess right 80% of the time, you're impressed. But I'm still guessing, and I'm still a charlatan. I don't know. I'm assuming. So this is the context. What if you meant depression in terms of history, in terms of geology? Well, it's your issue. Add more words. Oh, you mean I have to know more words to add? Okay, yes, you have to be a more precise searcher. So then we're getting this idea that Google doesn't know the context. And then I love this quote. Anybody else a geek here? Raise your hands. Okay, now Google was a revolution in a way. Anybody remember, the search engine that existed before Google? There was a bunch of them. So what would be the seed of Google's own destruction? I'm not saying it won't change, but PageRank. This is what made Google what it is. Without it, it didn't seem that intelligent. It offered nothing else than, remember Alta Vista, Lycos, I couldn't even remember all the dozens of search engines that were before that. So PageRank, PageRank, PageRank. You all use Google because of PageRanking, the order in which it puts the results. So where does PageRank apply? It only applies to things that have hyperlinks. Okay, some of you say Google Scholar. We can talk about that at the end. But generally speaking, it was designed to use hyperlinks. Without hyperlinks, PageRank is worth nothing. It cannot do anything for you, meaning it only works for HTML. Okay? Scholar is something else. Case in point, ever heard of this? GSA? Google Search Appliances? No, strangely enough. What? This is Google for companies. They figured if Google works awesome, then you should be able to install it in all the corporations and you should be able to use it. You haven't heard of it because no one really bought it because it didn't work. Who's using Google Desktop? What? We just said Google does everything well. Why don't you use Google Desktop? Because it doesn't know how to rank your results. It has no hyperlinks. Your documents have no hyperlinks. Corporate documents have no hyperlinks. So Google only works in a very small portion, only on the web where there's inbound and outbound hyperlinks. So what about books, corporate institutional documents, articles in journals and magazines, databases, masses and masses of databases? The world of information is much bigger than HTML. And even in the world of HTML, Google admits it only knows a small portion of that. I think a few years ago we were talking about 4 to 6% of the web Google is indexed at this point. Maybe that's 8, then 10%. I'll give them 20, I don't care. It's a small portion. So, okay, this is not the scale. Imagine this is information. Now within that you have all the different kinds of information. Okay, this is what Google knows. 4 to 6% of the HTML. So really this is the only place that PageRank does anything for you. Okay, sure, Scholar, so we can get into that. But, so now let's say you all agree with me, it's not perfect, what do we do? Well, part of that is to make information exploration a bit simpler. That's also called browsing, this idea of looking around, seeing what's there. An explorative process where searchers scan for information to focus or refine. So this idea that you don't quite know what you're looking for because you're really not that knowledgeable on the subject you're looking at. You don't know how to recognize stuff, it's broad or ill-defined, and you want to inspect the structure of the links between different things. It's the difference between saying, how many whiskers on a cat's nose? That's a precise question with a precise answer. And what's the state of coffee production in Western Africa? That's a broad question, which is going to require multiple documents that have links between them. Okay? One is information you could probably sell to someone who's in the business of coffee production. The other one is what anyone can find off the street. Cats on whiskers nose doesn't have any value. Okay? And this often with no planning or a little vague and non-specific matter. You're in introductory places and you're looking around. So it's when it's easier to recognize. I'll know it when I see it. And the inquiry demands more of an exhaustive search. I'm not looking for one good enough. I'm looking for a lot to know that I've looked around enough. And you're not quite sure how to come up with good keywords. So what are some barriers to that? Well, infinite lists of purely textual results are not easy to explore. How many of you go beyond the 10th result in Google or any search engine? Very few. Almost no one goes beyond the 30th. So there's nothing good beyond that. How comprehensive could the first 10 results possibly be? Well, if you're just looking for good enough, that's fine. If you're looking to give this to your boss, probably not fine. You need to go beyond that. Start digging. And there's probably good stuff beyond the 30th link. We just assume there is. And then there's no indication of multiple contexts for a keyword, that idea of depression. So that's a barrier as well. Would it be nice if Google told you, oh, you look for depression? Did you mean in the context of geology? Did you mean in the context of psychology? Right now it's just mixed in. The psychologies will be at the top. And there's no insurance that the results really cover all search concepts. If you put in green tea, life expectancy, cancer, you got 3 concepts here that cross. And you want a document that tells you about the cross of those 3 things. What search engines can do is tell you, oh, I found these terms in this document. And I can't guarantee you that they're actually talking about the cross of those. Maybe you'll be lucky, maybe you won't. Now, it's, multiple subjects crossing, more difficult. Okay, so then, what's the answer to that? We're still organizing information. It's an old, expensive practice. It was relevant then, now, and tomorrow. What do I say tomorrow? Even this project of the semantic web, I don't know if anybody's heard of this. I was always impressed because when I looked into it, it's basically they're going to categorize content in part by topic in semi-automated ways. And when I taught this to students, I used to say, what does that mean? It means it's not automated. It means we have to do it by hand still. A very large portion of it. So we're talking about making groups, similar groups, make subgroups if you need to, label them, and then assign one or more of these labels to each information item. Now, this is expensive, so you probably don't want to do it for everything. You want to do it for what you think is valuable. Now, who's going to choose what's valuable? That's not my research question. That's a question for someone else. Now, there are multiple organized collections. Now, I'm not from this field, but when I got this field, I realized, wow, you mean you've done this? You've organized information using, wow, that's amazing. Why don't we use this? And then I got no answer. Why doesn't the regular person use this? Because you need training. You need to understand how it's formatted and the structure. But libraries, corporations, and governments, they structure the information. All of you on your hard drives have what? A hierarchy of folders and subfolders. Why don't you just take a big pile and use Google Desktop? Somehow you think it's worth it to make subfolders and subfolders. This is the same process. We're making folders and subfolders and we're putting information into them. This exists on the web, the Yahoo directories were the first idea behind categorizing the web. Google has the Google directory, which is actually based on the Open Directory project. So it's out there for the web as well. Wikipedia, Amazon, they're all sticking all their stuff into a structure like that of controlled terms, and each item is placed into it. They all do this. The semantic web, they're proposing to do this too. So, we're talking about control vocabulary, we're talking about things like LCSH, mesh. It's basically what? We're just saying, we're controlling synonym. From this point on, we're going to call a dog a dog. It's not going to be a Canis lupus familiaris. It's going to be a dog, okay? And then all the other synonyms for it, they're going to tie back to that. And we're going to have relations. We're going to do something like this, a chihuahua, which would be potentially the way someone would type it in, but this is the actual term we're going to use, and it's a kind of dog, it's a member of the Canidae family, and it's a carnivora. So you're building what? Relation, different levels of abstractions for a concept. This is what control vocabulary can allow you to do, or an ontology can allow you to do. And this is useful then. I'm looking for all the carnivores. I didn't say I was looking for dog, but then my webpage is smart enough, oh, you want dogs, because it knows that a dog is also a carnivore, even though the author may not have said that. I'm looking for people in Wisconsin. Oh, then that must mean you want people in Milwaukee. I didn't say that, but my webpage could be smart enough to know people from Milwaukee are from Wisconsin. This idea of knowing these abstraction levels, these implicit meanings. And this is one of the goals of semantic web technologies. Now, people want subject access. They just, at this point, they haven't been shown how to use them a lot. So I think that this is an example that, what's his name, Warnheimer, I think, came up with. Wenheimer? I heard this last week. You're interested in horses? Look how interesting this is. What do you think is in there? Anecdotes of the behavior of horses in the United States. That's something that's only allowed to be given you or suggested to you because someone has taken the time to organize content in this particular fashion. So you go from this really broad thing to, whoa, wonder what's in there. Okay? So I'm giving you an idea. Maybe you want this. There's 20 different kinds of these strings of subjects that talk about horses. So we're trying to give you an idea of what else is out there that you might not even imagine and that you may be interested in because someone took the time to do that. And much of the world's valuable knowledge has been fitted into something like this, into networks of concepts. Network, does that sound familiar? You know, people like networks like the web, Facebook. They like surfing networks. You just got to give them the right tool to do it. And this stuff can be fitted into a network. It's sad that it's not obvious. So that's the thing, not tools. When I say more on this, this guy's got hidden slides. So if you wanted more on this, at the end we'll talk about that. Okay, now we talk about subject hierarchies. This idea that these subjects, LCSH, MESH, they're all in a hierarchy, they're in a network. Now, networks are different kinds of relationships, but part of it is hierarchical. I have a hierarchical component to most of these concept networks. So I can use that. And hierarchies are easier to navigate than undirected graphs because we can understand that there's a broad term and it goes down, so it's easier to understand. Now, like as I was saying, you've all built this yourselves into your hard drive. So everybody has that intuitive notion of a hierarchy. And this could benefit searchers for things like query expansion, adding new terms that are related, maybe more specific or broader, and then kind of navigate subjects at different levels of abstraction. So then I'm looking at the specific case of Library of Congress subject headings. Can we make that a lot easier to use? So why is that interesting? Because it's the most widely used, as far as I know, throughout the world in the English language. Most widely used in vocabulary. We're talking about thousands of significant collections worldwide. Okay, now some people are going to jump on me, but I say it acts like a thesaurus. Okay? It may not be, that's a finer point, but it has broader, narrower, related terms. And it's what I think is the largest known knowledge oncology component. So there is the project right now that the Library of Congress is pushing, is to transfer this to the semantic web through the SKOS project. So the future of the web might benefit from all this existing knowledge of concepts and how they relate to one another. So what's some of the usage barriers behind it? Well, there are some anomalies and inconsistencies. If you're curious, ask me. I'll show you because they're very interesting. There's a large number of orphan terms without broader and narrower terms, so conceptual islands that don't link up to anything else. They're very large and difficult to explore efficiently, and I'll show you what I mean by that. And so that ends up being that the hierarchical structure, the folders, they don't open up and cascade systematically. It's kind of disjointed. And so in the end, users must work hard to understand this hierarchy, and based on the principle of least effort, most people will ignore it. They don't know about it because it's too hard to figure out. So this is an example about what I mean, how difficult it is. This is a very small hierarchy. It's starting to look like spaghetti, right? I'm talking here about 50 nodes, these individual ones. Imagine these are subjects. This would be biology, maybe this would be molecular biology, and we go more specific. So right away we got about 50 subjects, and we're saying, ooh, this is starting to be, ooh. And most search engines or library catalogs don't even show it to you visually like this. So for 50 it's started difficult. LCSH we're talking about 200,000. So imagine the size of this thing. Okay? Very difficult to go through. So what do? Well, can we simplify it to make it easier to access? For searchers, catalogers can have their full complete version, but for searchers, can we narrow it down, make it easier to use? And there's patterns in the way information is organized, and they could be useful to simplify. Subject structures tend to be sparsely populated by their collections. What does that mean? That means most subjects are empty, or almost empty, by a specific collection. So, there's traditionally a distinction. We talk about the structure that comes from the Library of Congress, and it's independent of the collection. And then we realize that when we take a specific collection, if you take the UWM collection and you see, okay, where does it fit into the structure? Well, most of this structure that came from the Library of Congress is empty. So you don't need to show 200-some thousand subjects. You only need to show the ones that have stuff in them. So already we're trying to look, if we combine the two, it can be highly simplified. And the idea is that probabilities are pretty low, that searchers are often interested in empty or near empty subjects. Catalogers may be, because they need to put a book in the right subject. The searchers, probabilities are low. So we could potentially facilitate exploration by lessening the importance of empty or near empty subjects. It would be kind of a form of semantic hierarchy noise reduction. We're reducing the empty areas. So to get back to this example, if I then take this raw structure and look where is my collection situated, then I quickly realize, oh, well, it's not as complex as I thought. This is just a representative example. A lot of these branches will disappear because they're near empty or empty. So that's that brings us this idea of reconstructing the hierarchy based on how the collection is distributed within it. On the one hand, catalogers, they need the complex hierarchy because they have to place a book in the right place. That's independent of any collection. But searchers, they want to know what subject the collection covers. So that's dependent on the collection. So the raw structure would be for the catalogers, but you can reconstruct it for the searcher. And this has never been attempted at IR as far as I know. So let's try to see if it can be done. You take the raw data. I get about 120,000 marked records, so imagine 120,000 books. In the domain of science and engineering, I've got the organizing structure, 280,000 LSH, so the structure here, the concepts, the relations. Of those, about 205,000 were actual subjects. And if you look at the assignments in the bibliographic records, I had about 63,500 unique subjects assigned. So right away I'm seeing the structure which was 200,000. No. For this collection it's only 63,000. Okay, so I don't need to show the whole thing. But beyond that, okay, so this is where I skipped 5 slides. Ask me at the end. What it ends up being, if I compare it to other studies, is that this UNL 2005 had about 250,000 subjects for 16 levels deep. Wang in 2007 had about 18,000 for 23 levels, and they're saying it was the deepest ever tested in test classification studies. So I've got about 63,000 for about 25 levels. So we're pretty much one of the biggest. So it's quite ambitious. Most people will start with a small one and see if it scales up. But if you're crazy, you'll take a big one, and you'll see what can I do with it. Now, there's patterns here. Over 60% of subjects contain one single item. Imagine that. All these subjects, most of them, one thing in there. This is explained if you know how catalogers work. It's a policy. You put the most precise subject, so that. And of course they said it's clear that the document follows a power law. We'll see what that means. In essence, it means something like this. The top 1% most popular subject contain 25% of the collection. In this research, I found 65% of subjects contain only a single item. My top 1%, almost 60% of the collection was in the top 1% subjects. Huge lopsided. Very few subjects are actually significant in any one collection. Most of the subjects are insignificant, meaning they barely have anything.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
When you say subjects, do you mean the main subject heading or a subject stream, unique subject stream?
This is a very good question. In this case, I mean a unique subject string.
Okay.
Yes. I'm sure some of you are like, huh? We'll go to that at the end. That's what we mean by power law. If you take here, on the horizontal axis, all the subjects that are contained in the collection, and this goes on for miles, all over here for about until, where's that, north? Green Bay. And then you take, on the vertical axis, how many items have been assigned to each subject. You quickly see that there's, in this case, geology contains 3,000, but it quickly drops off. And you quickly see that beyond a certain point, most subjects have barely anything in them. So what does that mean? I can take just this chunk here, and I represent the vast majority of the collection. And I essentially, this long tail here, I'll never be able to include the whole collection, because if you understand how these types of graphs go, it never goes to 0. It always, unless you take them all, but then you get 200,000 of them. So you can take a very small number of subjects, and you've got the vast majority of the collection. And by doing that, you're also simplifying the hierarchy. This is the raw LCSH hierarchy as I would have gotten it. This is not D, this is a very small part of it. So as an example of the type of things you can do. It looks kind of funny, right? We can understand this, science, technology, and underneath that engineering falls in there. But what's this? Handicraft, industrial arts, and engineering is under there too. You know, when I first visualized this, I've never seen someone do this for me. I was like, oh my goodness, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. And people were like, what is this? And I said, well, some other collections, it might make sense. I don't know. This is the raw structure coming from Library of Congress. So when you start inspecting how the collection is distributed within that, you often find that the subjects are often subdivided into a single narrow subject, something like this. Spring ecology is subdivided only one time, so it's really not divided, into hot spring for this collection, meaning no other subjects are used under spring ecology except hot spring ecology for this collection. So this ends up being a useless subdivision. So then I could just stack it on to this one and eliminate a level, simplify my hierarchy. So I have a bunch of these, and also have a lot of nearly single narrow subjects. So things like, if 95% of the stuff that's in here is in here, well, that's kind of close to a single subdivision. So again, this idea that if the vast majority of the stuff is only in one subject, well, we can simplify it. It essentially provides no division of the broader parent. So I go from this, by applying these principles, I get something like this. And imagine this times 60,000. I go from an impossible to understand hierarchy that's got all these weird offshoots that make no sense to clarity. Things become very clear because all I've got are subjects that have predominantly enough items into them. So I start having something that I actually use. So the major branches become isolated. There are no conceptual islands. It's a fully expandable hierarchy. We'll say in exploration because it's a lot more simplified. I've got, in the end, I went from 63,000 to 1,800 subjects. So we're talking about access to about 14,000 subjects. That would be the strings, the complete strings, using only 22% of the original number of subjects. And this, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with my numbers. We'll have to look at that again because I want to show you my demo before Richard leaves. So in the end, I think the important number here is we have a 72% reduction in complexity, and for a 92.8% access to the collection. Some of you are going to say, you lost access to part of the collection. Yes, that's another issue. Why some of these subjects were not included in structure? That's another question. More on this at the end. But essentially what we're trying to do is a clear portrayal of the complexity. So you can actually give them something to start with. That's not impossible to understand. Okay, so now you've simplified LCSH. Now what? Well, we're going to visualize it. And what we're going to try to do for GUIs, what GUIs have done for operating systems. Everybody remember this? CLIs, command line interfaces. How old are we? Okay, I started with that. I'm old enough. There we go. We got some brave souls here. Okay. Now back then, in the early 80s, there was a huge scientific uproar about color is useless. Who needs color? There was no measurable impact of adding color to interfaces. There was a whole debate about icons, what possibly used, but that doesn't matter. We all went through this. Remember that? Okay, so let's pretend now that we're today and we've got only text-only interfaces. Who would be willing to choose that? Well, you all do every day. You use Google. It's purely textual. Text in, text out. Can we do something better? Well, we can try to reveal the patterns in the data. And then one of the patterns we're talking about today is that most of the collections only use a small portion of the structure. So let's try to reveal that. These are some previous attempts. I'm going to go quickly with that. Something trying to use, this was mesh. So using mesh, and you have to give a term, initial search term to it. This was catacomb, something very close to what I tried to do. But again, using mesh is easier to use. It's much narrow subject area, and the structure is beautiful. Much more control. LCSH is, next professor of mine called it barely controlled chaos. So I went for the chaos. Structure versus data, I'll go quickly. So this is static, just a picture, you can't interact with it. And this was again mesh, you have to put a search term to begin with. Okay. Now, what I've done is I made a virtual reality hierarchical subject browser, but it's also, it fully integrates the content. You can search through the information as well as browse the structure. So, what does it look like? That's the main screen, but usually someone in the room says, well, that's not 3D, that's 2D, see? That's not, so I've come to realize that yes, it is a 2D screenshot, the 3D world, but now you get to see the real thing. It takes a few seconds to load up. What I've come to realize when I give these talks is the idea of movement in a 3D world is absolutely essential, so that people get this idea that yes, you can move around them. So, same starting screen. Oh, now I see it's a 3D. I can move in and out of it. This is the LCSH structure, unrecognizable to anyone who knows LCSH because it's been massaged, as I've described it earlier on. It's been simplified based on where this collection is housed. So if I can click on any of these subjects, this computer's a bit slow for this, it expands branches underneath this. It brings you closer to physics because it's assuming this is what you were interested in at this point. Gives you narrow subjects in physics. Again, look around. I'm giving you here a list of specific items in physics. I can click on any of these subjects. Give me some subjects here. Some subjects that these books would have been assigned to beyond physics. And then it would bring me to that place in the hierarchy. So, I don't know, environmental science. I wonder what that's about. So this brings me somewhere over there. So this is something I can interact with the structure, but it becomes interesting. You see here the green stuff tells me where I've been. So I can start drilling down. So this is like, you could say, well, that's just an Windows Explorer in 3D. Okay, then I would say, oh yeah, well, can Windows Explorer do this? Can you search in Windows Explorer? No, you have to press search in another interface, and it gives you a list. I can search in this. So maybe I don't know, algorithms. There's a spell check on this, but I think I spelled it right. So what happens? Here a good old rank list of results, and here most of the labels have disappeared. It's only showing me the labels that have stuff in them with the word algorithm. And then I start navigating, so basically I've filtered the structure. I'm being shown as simplified. So if I start clicking on stuff, what does this tell me? It tells me, well, this area, forget about it. No, not really promising. Cybernetics. So that's an interesting word. Let's see what's in there with algorithms down there. Oh, a lot of stuff down here. This is a good area for it. Keep looking around like that. It's really nothing more than that. The structure has been highly simplified. You can inspect it. Thank you, Richard. And the interaction between searching and the structure, meaning it's a dynamic pruning. So imagine you've got your Windows Explorer, you put in a search, most of your folders disappear to show you where your search results are situated in your structure. You cannot do that. You have to go to a different interface and it just gives you a list. Okay? Is that clear as mud or water? Yeah? So that's basically what it does. I think that's all I've got for you. So, we've looked at search engines that are not perfect. I'm sorry to have destroyed the illusions. Information exploration, organization information, issues with LCSH. We've looked at patterns, how we can exploit them, to reconstruct the semantic structure, and I've shown you a bit of 3D information visualization. What am I doing now? I'm trying to see if these same patterns are also present in different collections, in different organization structures. Now, Bates suggested that we should exploit these. We should try to give the public access to exploiting these patterns, like I've tried to do. Now, are they present in mesh collection? I'd be curious. I don't see why not. Now, what would be the effect of domain? mesh would be medical field. Would there be such a drastic pattern in the history domain or in the humanities domain? I had a science and engineering. So what would be the effect of that? And what about a semantic web collection? There's no reason to believe there wouldn't be that same distribution of collection of the items within the structure in the semantic web as well. And it's intuitive when you think about it. Throughout any time in history, certain subjects are a lot more popular than others. So you can show the most popular subjects. It doesn't mean you get rid of the rest. It just means you try to give a clear portrayal of the overarching patterns, the main predominant distribution. Then you can search through all the nitty-gritty if you want. Okay, what else do we got? And thanks for your interest. Any questions? How was I started? That was short, actually.
You spoke too fast.
I'm sorry. I had pressure. It comes all over here.
Any questions?
So if I'm understanding correctly, if you had, say, just one or two items in a very narrow subject, would that be then subsumed under a broader subject, so you'd still have access to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you understand the question? Let's go. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do this. Okay. What if this had two items, and so I figured it's not important. I take those two items, I bring them here. Now, how many items do I have in here? If I've got 20, maybe that's not important enough. I bring them here. Okay, I got 300 here. Okay, now I'm showing this one. So they get brought up to their nearest predominant father subject. Next. Sounds too simple, eh? No questions. That's obvious.
I will follow up if I can.
Please.
You mentioned that 82% or something was covered, but there were some things that weren't.
Okay, so that was where I got fuddled my numbers. Sorry. So what does that? Where was that? No, it's after you. Okay, so that's talking about what you brought up. This idea that I'm giving access to something like 14,000 subjects, but through their broader parents that are significant. So there was actually 1,800 significant subjects. So so basically what we're saying is that 98% of the collection or something like that, or almost 93% of the collection, which had initially 63,000 subjects, 93% could be placed in this many unmodified subjects. And then once you bring them up to significant subjects, you're only visually representing about 1,800. So that's where that difference is. So I'm saying I'm giving you access to this through their broader parents. Some people ask me, well, are you losing that specificity of the subject by bringing them to the broader parent? Visually I am, but in the search index, they're there.
Okay.
So I can search through them. So they do show up if you search with the terms that are in there. Yes?
I have a question there. I'm just thinking using your applications for example, like organizing our files. Does that mean we should at least have the LCSH for all the web files in order to visualize them in your structure?
Does that mean we should have a CSS?
The subject heading for our document, personal files, we should have that.
Well, I would argue you do. As in, you've taken the time to make a folder and you have a label on your folder. So in a way,
we should assign to them in order to use the structure.
Well, which structure you want to use is up to you. I don't decide that for you.
Say the LCSH structure.
I chose this one because it seemed like an interesting problem. But we could use your hard drive. It's a different structure. I don't care what the structure comes from.
I was just thinking, would that be like too much effort to do that if we do personally everybody's?
Too much effort? Well, it's computational effort, meaning I can run something that sees where your documents are distributed in your hard drive, and probably you have an 80-20 distribution, meaning 20% of your folders.
Computation complexity is more about like manually assign your subject heading.
I'm not suggesting you should do that. Assign LCSH subject headings?
Yes.
Okay, so what is your question? Your question is it important to keep doing that?
Uh-huh. Then
That's not a question for me, though.
Otherwise, we cannot visualize with the structure, the control vocabulary throughout.
You need to have a controlled ontology. That's the first thing. And then you need to have people. There's no better way. There's no automatic way to do this. You need to have people assign the subject headings to items. That needs to happen. But that's a whole other question is it useful to organize information?
Is it possible to have the headings on so many documents?
Well, it's happening on it's always the same question. What are you going to do it for? You don't do it for everything. You do it for stuff that you feel is important to keep an inventory of. Maybe stuff that costs you a lot to generate. Would I do it for blogs? No.
So you would say we do the manually indexing for the most important and the automatic for the rest.
What I say is unimportant because that's not my issue. My issue is it's already out there, my friend. People are spending millions doing this, spending their time. Professionals in this field are doing it. I'm saying it's there. Why don't we use it more? So maybe if we do, maybe it'll be more useful to everyone, and the value that we invest in it will be capitalized upon. But the semantic web, this idea of the future web, is based on the same idea. That people will take the time to assign URIs to their web pages from controlled ontologies. So there's nothing new there. Every 5 years, someone in the Congress says, why do we spend all this money cataloging stuff? And I think the answer is always, you got anything better? I think that's what I'm going to say. I'm sure some of you guys could fill in on that. But your question is valid, but it's not a question for me. That's all I'm saying.
I'll just discuss what do you think about that?
I think I have nothing better to offer. That's a sad fact. I wish, but I wouldn't do it for the web. I wouldn't do it for I wouldn't do it for blogs. You have to choose what you want to categorize like that. But when I see that the semantic web is, and it's the only kind of vision where we have to make web pages smarter, it relies on that too, then I see that no one's really come up with a better way. It's too bad. That's the fact.
I keep asking about the subject term and the subject string.
No, I'm glad you do, because I have to deal with it.
Yeah, so can you go back to that, one of the
I think you want some of my hidden slides. That's what you want.
probably, because of this, on those that you showed us, I think you only gave us the main subject headings, no strings, right?
Okay, hold on. What can I show you? I can show you. Okay, so,
No, show us those 3D things, one of them.
oh, okay. So the subject, yes, they're not subdivided. So there's no
they're all
optional.
main
But that's what I'm saying here, is that you have, okay, this is how they stored things in the old days. They had lists, right? So I have a list of bibliographic records and the subjects that were assigned to each of them. And then I have the list of authority subjects here. So if you want to place these things in the structure, I have to match them. I have to take a subject that's here and see where it ends up here. That's kind of hampered by the fact that most catalogers don't take the original. They modify it. They add optional subdivisions. That's what she keeps referring to, is these subject dash some other thing dash some other thing. These are the catalogers. They're bad people. They take this. They take the original one that I can place in the structure and they modify it, and I cannot place it anymore. So what I have to do, I have to get back to the unmodified one. I have to do that. So I'm ending up, if you look at how you match, in my collection, I've seen this as kind of standard. I had only about 23% exact matching. So of the subjects that I was finding in the bibliographic records, only about a quarter of them were the exact original that came from the Library of Congress. 74% of them, I could match them only if I progressively took away the optional subdivisions to get back to the unmodified string. Now, the full string, I keep it in the search index, but the unmodified string allows me to place it in the hierarchy.
So how do you go from that 3D thing? Okay, so if I find one interesting subject heading there, so how do you go from there and then go to all the subject strings
Yeah.
that begin with that particular subject heading? and
They will
with
appear,
subject-
well,
subject
remember
headings?
that list? They appear in the list. So you can actually spot them there.
But they are not, they were, as I remember, they were listed in individual records. They are not like the currently,
Okay.
on the online catalog, we see a list of subject strings.
So now the question is, should we have an intermediary step between searching and results, which would be the authority records? That's your question. Where do I see my authority records in a list? I think that's what you're asking.
No.
Because
You
I've
know,
never did
you
a
actually mentioned it in one of the slides. You said, I can't remember the string. Can you remember?
Oh, the horses thing?
The horse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you find
Okay,
that?
so that subject, that may not, currently on the online catalog, if you search for horses,
Yeah.
right, and you retrieve a list of subject strings,
Yeah.
begins with horses, and then horses,
Uh-huh.
Africa maybe, and then horses, so you will see a list of subject strings. They are not authority records. They are just subject strings. So when you
Okay.
click on one of them, you will retrieve
Okay.
records that include that particular subject string.
Okay, so then you're asking me.
But that actually, you were right when you said that actually gives the list, gives users a visual
Yeah.
prompt, right? So I may not know the string,
Right.
but when I see it on the screen, it will prompt me
In
to
this
click on
case,
that.
I've chosen to integrate them with the records. So you see that complete string, but only with the record.
Right.
Because through user testing, I found that people didn't understand that you could get a list of pure subjects versus a list of information items. That distinction is automatic and natural to you. That you can search and retrieve subjects, whether they be subdivided or not,
Right.
versus search and retrieve information items. For most users that I try this, they're like, what is this? I want items. I want information. The intermediary step, and I did this morning with my class, and most people don't know that the library catalog is not meant to be searched by keyword. It's meant to be searched by control term, whether it be author or, like you say, the subject string. But most users don't understand that. I tried at the beginning to say, well, if you match a perfect string of subjects, then I'll show you. You're matching a subject. Then we say, okay, am I matching information? No, you're matching a subject as opposed to a piece of information. What do you mean by that? What do you mean I'm matching a subject as opposed to a piece of information? It's not the same thing. You're matching the container as opposed to the contained. So that's the distinction I threw there. Because it was the usability issue behind it was impossible to deal with. To explain to users, okay, now this is a subject, and you've matched that as opposed to matching an item. But your question is correct. Where do I see my subdividing subject headings? You only see them strictly with the records. You do not see a list of just subject terms that were assigned to bits. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, but I'm not happy about that.
I know, but I would say you're not representative of the vast majority
I don't
of
think so,
users.
because I read, for example, Thomas Mann's works, right? He's a reference librarian at the Library of Congress.
Uh-huh.
He's a big a proponent of using Library of Congress subject headings.
Oh, I know.
So, some students may not know. And so it's very important, and I agree with him, that when a user, a naive user, searches for a particular concept and retrieves a list of subject headings, then the list of subject headings actually gives visual clue as to what other possibilities in terms of subject are out there, are in there, in the online catalog.
I'm not denying that. What I'm
Right.
saying is the way you present it as being something of an entity on its own, the list of subjects, is
Right.
something that in terms of usability just makes you lose 90% of users. And if you want to lose 90% of users in terms of usability, then you're
I'm not convinced of that. I'm not.
well, let's just say that when I put this in front of the people and I make a distinction between matching a subject and matching a piece of information, the distinction is totally lost on them, and I cannot convince them that they should bother with it.
Right, this I understand, but
Right.
when you see a list of subject headings, I'm not convinced that 90% of the users would not know that they could click on any one of them to find real books.
The
or
principle
real
of least
documents.
effort.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I'm not
Yeah.
convinced of that.
But even in Amazon, you've got on the left
Right.
a list of subjects and you can drill down. I think people realize that they can click on those and then.
Where does
that's gonna generate-
Amazon put its subjects when you get to a detailed view? The last thing at the
Yeah.
bottom. What does that
When
tell
you
you?
look at the detailed view.
Huh?
When you look at the detailed view, but when they're doing the browsing, it's off to the left.
I mean, I'm giving you subject headings from Library of Congress. What you're saying is you're not satisfied. You want the subject headings that were in the collection subdivided with optional subdivisions. I'm saying let's compromise. Let's use it partly, because right now nobody uses stuff except trained librarians. So let's use it in part, the unmodified structure, and then let's leave the optional subdivisions to
No.
reside with the records.
I actually think this is a very good, very useful tool, but I'm not convinced that the other thing shouldn't be here. I think
Where-
there should be somewhere a combination. So leading from here to
Yeah.
a list of the subject headings with subdivisions, because
It's not impossible.
people
It's not
cannot
impossible.
use subdivisions on their own.
Uh,
When you give them a choice, a number of choices, that becomes easier to use.
The problem is they're all, quote unquote, insignificant in the sense that because catalogers add subdivisions so it's as precise as possible, systematically, the fully unmodified string contains very few items because it's the most specific it can be. So by definition, it'll never contain a huge predominant portion of the collection. So what that happens here is if I could have one of these terms and show you all the subdivisions, maybe under dynamics, that they would contain 1, 2 item each. It's not illegal, like, it's very possible, but you would quickly bring up this issue of, okay, I got 46 to show you under this. How do I possibly represent this visually? And that's I think we have to remember, in a visual interface, we're not trying to show everything. We're trying to make it easier so you can actually start to get into it.
Yeah, that's what I actually
Mhm.
believe. So
Right.
that's why I want the next step like that. But the thing is that
Show me the money.
No, the question I have actually, I would suggest that you or others to continue doing research in this direction, because it will give us some kind of answer whether we need to continue structuring subject headings like that. You know, many students in my 511 classes over the years are not convinced. They think it's just a waste of time, right? So, but there is no one who has done this kind of research showing that these strings have no use. For me, you know, I'm an outlier. I use these subject strings all the time. And I believe that when users are prompted
Mm-hmm.
with these strings, they will also use it.
I would agree.
Okay, but it just depends on how you integrate that into.
I think it's an issue of
the
tool.
interface.
Make it easy for them
Right,
to
so
interact.
I think this could be maybe the first contact with the user,
Mhm.
and then it will lead to other possibilities.
Eh.
But again, I don't have the research to back up on my claim either.
Well, we totally, I mean, then the question is phase 2. How do you then add another layer of complexity onto this without making it seem too daunting? Or how, you know,
But I think it's fun. But like when you do this, I think it's fun. You know, I don't think it's a chore. Finding whatever I want. I can explore. I can move. Right. For me, it's equally fun to look at a
Yeah.
list of subject strings.
yeah. When I tested this with actual users, and that was one of the things, we get this in visual interfaces all the time. You take a visual interface and you take the textual equivalent, which is what I did. I took the same search box, the same result list, just web-based interface, and I compared the two. In terms of performance, same thing, just as quick, just as good. But which one do you think you like better? This one's cool. oh yeah, it's fun, it's colorful, I can move around, I can do this system, the significant effect, so something I can actually report on. In terms of performance, I had some, that's for another time. Yes?
Well, I think kind of on what, I mean, isn't it kind of, what she's trying to get at is what kind Google somewhat does when you start typing in something in the box, it starts listing all kinds of different subjects
Different-
and alternatives.
yeah,
down there. I mean, that's the same thing that she's,
It could be a way, yeah.
that we're trying to get at, or, you know.
Except
I
Google
mean-
just does it with strings. That,
No, I understand it. but-
she has a very limited set of terms that can
Right,
show up.
but what
which-
makes Google so successful is, just like you said, it's the least amount of steps you can possibly use to get information.
Yeah.
And that's the one people are, you know, it's the line that's the shortest, and that's where the majority,
Yes, that's true, but.
not the best, just
No,
the
no,
shortest.
no, I don't even want to go there, and best is very relevant. I want to remind you of this. This was the least amount of steps. If you knew the command, it was the quickest, the least amount of steps to launch and start anything. Okay? People chose this. So it's not always, and this has been verified over, performance isn't always the most important criteria. At some point, performance becomes good enough, comparable, and other criteria come into play. And one of those is, I like it. How does it make you feel? Can I learn it quickly? We found that people can learn this a lot more quicker because it's suggested to them things that they could just do, even if they didn't know what they wanted to do. They had no idea. Here, you have to know exactly what you wanted to do. And I think that's the issue we have with search right now. You have to know something about what you're searching, as opposed to what I'm trying to do is, here's some of what I got. Do you want it? But I don't know, we can go much further. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you. Finish your lunch.
Sure.